Hey guys, the Explorer of Horror here, Horror Boy 465, finally back here on YouTube, and we're finally back to another live stream with my boy Steve, aka Red Bandcast, aka Resurrection Reviews, which is his new channel name. And yeah, welcome to this live stream, Steve. It's great to have you back again, man.
Alrighty, yeah, great to be back, Nate. I'm really excited. I'm really excited. We're gonna do a really good topic today, I think.
Yeah, and I know that the live stream is titled a very weird title, and that's because we've just been trying to get this thing on the road for so long now, and finally, because YouTube has changed so much since we've done our last stream, it really has. Like I tried doing it on my phone, it said I had to have 1,000 subscribers. Then I was like, dang it! So I got on here, and it was just a big mess. But today, basically, what we're doing is we're going through some of the most influential horror films of decades between 1920 to the 2010s, which is the current horror generation that we're in. It's almost over, but it's kind of the one that and we'll kind of get into what, if we make it to the end of that, this list, we'll talk about what we think the direction of horror is going to go. Because I think I got a pretty good idea in 2019 as to where this direction of horror is going. But yeah, we're going to go from the 1920s to the 2010s. And to start off the 2010s, we have, I'm just going to pull up my list here real quick. Sorry, I didn't have this up already, but we have the 1920s. My pick for the 1920s is Nosferatu. But also you could say it's Nosferatu or slash The Phantom of the Opera, because those are two movies that I've seen from the 1920s that I really enjoyed, and I think they both are big influences on the 20s for different reasons. First of all, they, back in the day in the silent film era, it was all about showing physical acting, about being very physical when you're acting. I think that's something that's kind of strayed away from film in general, is the physicality in acting. And I remember when I was watching Phantom of the Opera especially, that really shows there, and the music, and it really feels like a play. And Steve is holding up a DVD.
Yeah. Sorry, that's Phantom of the Opera. That's the edition that I own. This terrible Alpha Video edition. Really terrible transfer. The music on it is abysmal. But the movie itself is great. And my phone, by the way, right now, just so you guys can kind of get a little inside baseball, I'm getting a call from a telemarketer, and I'm going to hang up.
Yep, I get those all the time.
So anyhow, yeah, Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah, they want to talk about Phantom of the Opera with us.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, let me join, guys. Come on. I could sell some phones in the meantime. No. You never know. The telemarketers never know.
Yeah.
How is that, though? Because I had a Night of the Living Dead transfer. It was like what is that Good Times Video, that really bad transferring company, like that takes these well-known movies, they transfer them like awfully. I got it from Night of the Living Dead, and honestly, it looked worse than VHS. But it kind of added to the movie in a way.
Yeah, I've also got an Alpha Video release of Night of the Living Dead. Funny enough, for this as well. I figured we would probably talk about both of these movies eventually, and so I pulled it off the shelf. It's the only way I own it, besides on like multi-packs and stuff like that. But the transfers on these movies are awful, but they're serviceable for $1 or however much you spend on them.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I think there's like so many different transfers in Night of the Living Dead, which we'll get into that in a second, but there really is. There's like 1,000 transfers because there's no rights to it. Anybody can really pick that movie up and make profit off of it. But for me, what made Phantom of the Opera, and we'll get to Nosferatu in a second too, but what made Phantom of the Opera very good to watch was I think it was a very artistic horror film, and it did things that I thought in the 20s, like I was watching movies in the 50s and this stuff didn't happen. I mean, you're seeing shadows of hanging people. You're seeing close to on-screen violence. There's points in the movie where you are kind of witnessing somebody getting killed, and not in a very gruesome way. I mean, most of it is just you're getting these suggestions. But and I think this movie had made that classic thing that I've always seen in like Disney movies and I've always seen in these really old school comedies and stuff like that, where somebody grabs like a bamboo stick and is under the water and is trying to sneak through an area. That's what the Phantom of the Opera does. And I'm like, well, I mean, well, that's what the Phantom does in this movie. I'm like, well, I mean, that's probably the first time I've seen that in a film. Just going back this time, I don't know if it's done before that, but I think that kind of made that famous because I've seen it in plenty of other films before. But without Phantom of the Opera, you wouldn't have the artistic, physical acting, and you wouldn't have Lon Chaney. I think Lon Chaney is a fantastic actor. Huge, huge fan of Lon Chaney. I never really knew too much about Lon Chaney until I watched a great documentary called Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue, the history of the American horror film. That really shines a light on Lon Chaney and Lon Chaney Jr. And I haven't seen any of his other stuff. Like I think the one called The Clown or whatever, and the one where he's an amputee. Like there's all kinds of Lon Chaney movies out there, which I really want to see. But Lon Chaney did a great job. The makeup it still holds up to me. It still looks creepy. It's a shadowy film. It has a lot of shadows used. The music and the transfer that I got was all right. I don't know if it was the original score or not, but it was pretty good. I think they could do better, but you know, it is what it is. And it feels like it's shot on a stage, and I feel like that was a choice done by the filmmakers. And from what I've researched, apparently this set they shot this on is a very famous set that they would go on to use in other films, even other Lon Chaney films, like Hunchback of Notre Dame and stuff like that. So this stage would actually go on to be done better and other, like not better, but like done in other horror films and other films. It made it a very historic set in Hollywood. And I think that's what made that film important to the 20s, is that it introduced a very physical acting to horror films to where you could really get that dread and really get that suspense. But I think what Nosferatu does differently than Phantom of the Opera is that it's not as artistic. It's more about showing you visually frightening images, especially the look of the vampire in the film. It's more about showing you the shadows and the lighting, the darkness. It's more about showing you these characters and, you know, how this character would react to a certain situation. It's all about that, and I think that's all really well done in Nosferatu. So I think without Nosferatu, you wouldn't have that dark, gothic, gritty vampire film that it is, and you wouldn't have that style introduced that early. And then without Phantom of the Opera, you wouldn't have that artistic kind of feel in horror films, to where at that time you couldn't do much with voice, so you could do more with your body language. So I think those films are very influential in horror, but that's just my picks. Steve, you wanted to talk about your picks if you got any?
I figured maybe you would talk about Nosferatu because putting all the cards on the table here, I haven't seen all of Nosferatu. I've seen about half of it because of anytime I try to watch it, for some reasons, I'm kind of like scheduling difficulty comes up, or I have to end up doing something. But so Nosferatu is one that's still on the list, and it's a big gaping hole in my filmography. But anyway, as far as like any other silent horrors, you do have Phantom of the Opera. You were talking about that. Phantom's kind of shot like an American movie of the time. So it's kind of got a typical sort of American cinematography and editing feel. But I think the really big thing to take away from Phantom of the Opera is sort of like this whole idea of adapting Gothic novels of the 19th century, bringing them into sort of a more modern audience. And also another really big thing is just Chaney himself and his makeup effects that he did. That's really, I think, the big thing to take away from Phantom as far as its effect on horror movies. The idea of using extreme makeup effects. And a big thing you can talk about with Phantom is the fact that these makeup effects actually had an effect on Chaney, because there's a story about Lon Chaney's son, of course, Lon Chaney Jr., helping his dad out with the makeup on that. And he said, well, one way you could do to get your nose up like that is to put a clothespin and stick it up at your nose there. I think it's like a lady's hairpin or something like that. And he said, you know what, that might be a good idea. He uses it, and then it like pierces right through his nose at some point. So this is like some real painful stuff. Chaney, of course, is sort of well known for using painful makeups on himself. It's really crazy that he didn't die earlier. Honestly, I mean, the guy is or was definitely an alcoholic, but yeah, big stuff there. Another silent film that I want to bring up, not American, German, also like Nosferatu, is in this collection, a really cheap little collection called Unspeakable Horror Classic Silence. The one that I'm going to talk about here is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is featured here inside the cover. I would love to get a better edition of this movie because it is really, really awesome. Just a bastion of German expressionism. This really creepy atmosphere created by different weird-looking sets that they've put out. The sets just look absolutely nightmarish and sort of Dadaist in some ways. They also look a lot like, you might notice later on, Tim Burton kind of style, because Tim Burton takes a lot from this movie. The way it's shot is very German expressionist, and you've also got kind of an early hint at one of Nate's and my favorite genres of horror, the slasher, because in The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, it's this guy going around killing people because he's a somnambulist. He's been controlled, and he's kind of doing this sleepwalking kind of thing. So it's kind of like a serial killer, and kind of also alludes a little bit to the zombie phenomenon that's going to be coming up as well. Yeah, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is one that I think everybody should see once. I mean, I don't have anything else to say because I haven't seen Nosferatu. I mean, I can't put any kind of bad on people who haven't seen this movie. But it is a little bit earlier than Nosferatu. It's 1920, and yeah, really brilliant. Another one on here is The Hunchback of Notre Dame. That we could talk a little bit about, but basically we'd be saying the same things about Hunchback that we would about Phantom. You know, the crazy makeup effects and sort of sympathizing with a monster kind of thing. Those are both things that you get from the Chaney movies. A lot of Chaney's filmography is kind of spent making freaks likable. That's a lot of his thing. I mean, that would stretch on into tons of different horror movies. Like you can go into Frankenstein, or you can talk about The Elephant Man or Freaks later. A lot of it is all from sort of this central piece that's Lon Chaney.
Yeah, I think he was. Oh, sorry, I didn't interrupt you.
No, you're good. I'm not talking.
All right. Just want to make sure, because that happens a lot on sometimes the live streams. Be like, yeah, hang on, let me go. All right, so, yeah, Lon Chaney, I think, is a very important figure in horror. I think, and not just horror, but when we talk about horror, when we go that far back in history, really horror was that almost not really centerpiece, but it was a very important influence back then. And it wasn't so much as just a side genre. Like now we have action comedy, but back in the day, it was really like horror was this thing that people could explore and do different things with. And you could explore different stories with it. And I think Lon Chaney did a great job with not only being a good horror icon, but being a good film icon, because like you said, he put on very painful makeups, went through very painful acting methods to really portray his characters. I think maybe he also could have inspired actors in the future. So why we get actors who go so far in the role sometimes, or even makeup effects artists at that point. And I haven't seen too many of Lon Chaney's movies. I've heard of a lot of them. This might have been the only Lon Chaney movie I've seen, but the box set that I got Phantom of the Opera in has movies like has Hunchback of Notre Dame. It might have, I think it has Freaks, maybe. Is he in that movie, or is
No,
he just?
he's not in Freaks, but Freaks is directed by a guy that collaborated with Chaney a lot. But Chaney's not in Freaks, but I would say like there'd definitely be a place for him if he were alive at the time that Freaks was being made.
Yeah, because I don't really think he lived that long into his film career. I think he didn't he. Didn't he do one sound movie before he passed away? He did one movie with sound, right?
Yeah, he did. He did. I can't remember the name of the movie. It includes the word London. I think it might be like The Night Ghoul of London or something like that.
Mm.
But that was in sound, but it's lost. It's a lost film, and we can't really find it. All we have is pictures of Chaney and his makeup, which is some freaky looking stuff. Honestly, it's really good.
That's that vampire movie, right?
Yeah, kind of a vampire.
Yeah, he got involved with that fire. And thousands of movies were lost. That's crazy. It's crazy to think that's something that happened like that back then.
Oh yeah.
It shows you how far film has gotten, like how far Hollywood's gotten, how far film has gotten. Mm-hmm. This is where it all started. And you can go back to action comedy, but this is all where it started. It started way back in the day as a small little idea, and it grew into something big. And that's what I think is really inspiring about films, and why I love film so much, because film gives artists a chance to create an image for thousands of other people to see, even hundreds. You go to film festivals now, especially nowadays. There's just so many opportunities out there for filmmakers. But the 1920s was definitely a very interesting year, because I think that's really when film started picking up steam. Film was this kind of brand new thing that just started getting off. And before this, you had films, you had horror films. You had an adaptation of Frankenstein, which I seen, and it was pretty bad. Not horrible, but it just, you don't know what's going on. You're just kind of like watching, like, man, like, what is going on here? But I do respect it. I think it's a Thomas Edison film. Mm-hmm. A Thomas Edison production. So that just shows you, like, Thomas Edison. I read about him in the history books now, but you know, I'm just joking around. But it's just funny seeing that, and really, I don't really know any films before the 20s, but I think the 20s is really when film in general started picking up speed. And when we roll into the 30s, this is when something very interesting happens, because this is really the first time in film where the films reflect the history, or the films reflect the times. And in the 30s, a very traumatic event happened in America, and that's the Great Depression. And it lasted through the 1930s. And during this time, it was very hard to make movies. It was very hard to get movies out there. It was very hard for audiences to see movies. And when they were making movies back in that time, a lot of them were Universal monster movies. And this is when we started getting Dracula. We got The Mummy. We got all kinds of classic movies. Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Invisible Man, Freaks, The Old Dark House. We also got some interesting movies that were kind of off to the side, like The Black Cat, which is something that I really want to see. You had King Kong, Dr. Jekyll, and Mr. Hyde, White Zombie. I mean, you could go on and on and on. But for me, the two most influential films of that time would probably be Frankenstein and Dracula, because those were the first two made, or at least the first two that I'm aware of that were made. And I know that Bride of Frankenstein's team seems to get a little bit more attention than Frankenstein. I haven't, just throwing it out there, I have the movies, but I have not seen either one. I have seen Dracula, but I have not seen Frankenstein. I have not seen The Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon. I know I have to, but I just haven't gotten to see them yet. There's a lot of Universal monster movies out there. But from Dracula, I can say that I was really impressed with not just the English version, because the DVD that I have also has the Spanish version. And I must say that both versions of the movie are good, but the Spanish version is very well done. And it was just interesting to me how back in the day, that's how they did dubbing. They didn't just redub over a film. They literally went out and they said, okay, here's a script from the American film. Let's see what we can do in our version to make it kind of a little bit better. And I'm just like, wow, man, like it was so different back then. Like, nothing like that would ever happen nowadays, unless it was a gimmick, unless it was done on purpose. You know, it's like when Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez made Grindhouse. It's like it really wouldn't happen naturally nowadays, but it was just kind of made. They knew they wanted to make a Grindhouse movie. I'm pretty sure back in the day they wasn't like, all right, Last House on the Left is going to be a Grindhouse movie. Let's go out and make a Grindhouse movie. They're just like, let's go out and make a movie. So that's what's interesting to me. But Dracula, I thought, really introduced a great idea of having these monsters. You know, it kind of reminds me of how Marvel is today. You know, we have all these movies, crossovers, we got prequels, sequels. That's kind of how the Universal monster movies were. And it was so strong that it would go on to the next decade even. You had the early 40s still being dominated by monster movies. And there's not many genres out there that can last almost 2 decades like that. And I really respect that about the Universal monster movie era. There's a lot of fans of it. I can see why. They're very they're films that, you know, adults, kids, teens, everybody can kind of watch. You know, you get your little bit of enjoyment out of each segment or each piece of the film, whether it's the acting, the makeup effects, the music, which they all have fantastic music from what I've heard. So, but I will say this: the Dracula, what made Dracula so interesting when I was watching it was there's no music. There's just the opening score, and then the rest of the film is silent. And I thought, like, wow, like I love music. Don't get me wrong, I love the music from back in the day. I think it's great. I think it has a good cinema feel. But when you don't have music and you have that kind of, you know, that wisping wind and that creepy sounds, I think it really adds an atmosphere to this film, and the black and white feel, and Bela Lugosi as Dracula, which would become one of the most iconic characters in movie history. I mean, people today still dress up like Bela Lugosi Dracula. Today, you know, just years upon years upon years later, people are still doing it, and that just shows you how influential that film was. And how influential almost every film from that decade was. I mean, people still know about the Wolfman. They still know about Frankenstein. They still know about the Invisible Man, the Mummy. And for me, what made Frankenstein and Dracula so important is that they kicked off what would become the Universal monster movie decade and a half. And to me, they're the movies that tackle the most interesting subjects. They do things out of the books, you know. Frankenstein does where you think he's just a mindless killer and he's going out there and killing people. But there's a scene where, and I haven't seen the movie yet, but I've seen clips to know enough about the film, where he goes to this little girl at this pond and they're throwing these flowers into this, you know, this pond. And you think he's going to kill this little girl, but really he shows he's friendly. And I think he ends up killing her by accident. And it really like, man, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He has his power. He doesn't know his strength, doesn't know his power. And you feel bad for the monster. You really do. You sympathize with the monster. And that's what made Frankenstein very interesting, is that it's not just some brute monster guy. It's, first of all, it's Boris Karloff, which I've come to love as an actor. He does a fantastic job in the film. And the movie, from what I've seen, looks like it's shot very well, directed very well, and written very well. And has gone on to be one of the most historic films out there. And Dracula, I think, is good because you have strong acting in there from at least Bela Lugosi and I almost said Sherlock Holmes, Van Helsing. Can you imagine a Sherlock Holmes and Dracula crossover? That'd be interesting. Who did this, Watson? Oh, I've been bitten, Watson. Oh my God. No, but yeah, Dracula is good because, like I said, the shadowing, the atmosphere. It was kind of a scary film for the time, but. Those are my picks for the films from the 30s. Sorry for going on so long, Steve, but what are your choices?
Oh, no, you're all good, man. So I figured you might choose Dracula. I was figuring maybe you might mention Frankenstein, but I went ahead and grabbed my Frankenstein Legacy Collection anyway, just in case. For me, the better movie is Bride of Frankenstein as compared to Frankenstein and Bride. I prefer Bride. However, I think if you're going just purely off of influence, maybe the best one would have to be the first Frankenstein. I commend Dracula for being kind of the first. I think they called them back then before they started calling them horror movies or even monster movies. Like I think what they were using at the studio was supernatural drama. I don't know. It sounds stupid to me, to be totally honest, but anyway, Dracula is commendable for being kind of the first of those supernatural dramas, but Frankenstein to me kind of exemplifies the monster movie a little bit better. Again, kind of furthering the idea of these sort of radical makeup effects. I mean, the makeup in Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein is just so great. Jack Pierce is maybe the greatest makeup effects artist of all time. If you're just talking about makeup effects and influence on makeup effects from that time, I mean, I think you gotta go with Jack Pierce. Really, really good effects. Wait. This is weird. Something popped up here. Huh. I don't know if I should keep talking or not.